Hello, everyone. Welcome to DCKAP's Driven podcast. We are kickstarting a new series today. Readers are leaders. Reading is an integral part of DCKAP's culture, and we learn a lot by reading. And I've immensely benefited by reading, and there have been a lot of great learnings. I would even say it changed my life. So this motivated us to start a new series on Driven by DCKAP podcast. Readers are leaders. We are going to do this regularly. And we're going to be discussing about the different books we have read and what are our learnings from those books. And I have with me Catherine from DCKAP, who is an avid reader. She runs the Driven by DCKAP podcast. Sometimes I get scared about Catherine because she reads a lot and you have to keep up with her. You need to read more. So Catherine, thank you so much for joining me as well. And we are excited to be doing the Readers Are Leaders, Driven by DCKAP podcast.
Thanks, Karthik. You know, it's really been an honor to produce the Driven podcast with you. And the main theme that we're always looking to capture is how to be driven in our careers, our businesses, and in our lives. And that's often accomplished by learning from people, especially those who have achieved success in some form and having mentors to look up to. But it's also in large part by learning from what we read. So I'm really glad to be talking with you about some of the most impactful books that you've read. And books certainly are a passion of mine. I've always looked to reading as a practice of introspection and a way to open my mind up to new ideas. But, you know, for me, sometimes choosing a book to be read can be a really difficult thing to do, especially when you have so many on your need to read list, which I'm sure everyone has a version of. So for that reason, I wanted to start by asking, what do you typically look for when choosing a book to read? Is there anything that first stands out to you? And do you prefer to choose them yourself or go by recommendations?
Thank you, Catherine. So I usually go by recommendations. I think that's the easiest thing to do. For instance, you listen to a podcast or you watch a video and people talk about the books they have read. And if it catches my interest, I just write it down and, hey, let me just order it. And I just get the book and start reading. So that's how I choose my books.
Yeah, that seems a simple enough way to do it, to keep it simple. And what initially drew you to this particular book, the 10x is easier than 2x by Dan Sullivan?
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading this book. 10x is easier than 2x, by Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy. It's a great book. So I attended a session with Michael Hyatt, who runs Full Focus, and he recommended during the session, he recommended 10x is easier than 2x. And the word 10x did catch my attention because all of us want to grow 10x. And I thought it was really, really interesting. And okay, let me just go and buy the book. And that's how I ended up with 10x is easier than 2x.
Right. And so how big of an impact do you think this strategy is? Getting rid of the 80% of mundane work, focusing on the top 20%, which has the highest impact, sort of the main strategy that comes out of this book. How big of an impact do you think this has in the current business environment?
Definitely. If you look at business, you have heard a lot of people say this, 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your customers. So focus on the top 20% of your customers to generate 80% of the revenue. And that's mostly true. And you apply the same strategy with your work or your daily lives as well. You're right. This is something Dan talks about in this book a lot. Hey, whatever you're doing, just look at the list of things you're doing, and 80% of it, take it and throw it away. And then start focusing on that top 20% and just do more of that. So that's what Dan talks about in the book. And again, you can't just throw it away sometimes. So essentially what Dan is talking about is delegating. You hire people to do that. So you hire people to do the 80% of the mundane work, and you just focus on the top 20%, and that's going to get you great results. Yeah, so it definitely has had a big impact on me. Again, I've heard about this in the past as well, and I try to implement it. But again, sometimes you have to learn things again and again, or if you read it again and again, or if you have more people say it, it really gets into your head. So yeah, so this was kind of a validation for that. So I thought, okay, let me just start focusing on the top 20% and get rid of the 80%. And you kind of rediscover yourself in the process.
Yeah. And you're definitely what we call a hustler, right? Yeah, you've attributed that a lot in your building of the business, always talking about how it's been bootstrapped and having that hustle mentality in growing the business. So I'm curious, what did you previously think about the hustle and grind mentality prior to reading the book? And what do you think of that mentality now after having read the book?
It's a great question. Again, I like hustling, and it's very interesting because what is hustling, right? So you try something, you don't get it, you don't give up, you try other things again, and you keep at it until you really get to where you want to go. So essentially, that's hustling. I like doing that because the more you fail, the more you learn, and failures really help you to hustle more. So essentially, if you fail, you're more motivated to do better. And more than hustling, I would say, sometimes when you're hustling, it looks like you're very busy. But then, there is a difference between a good busy and a bad busy. What are you busy with? And is that busyness the top 20%? Or is it on the 80%? And if it's on the 80%, you don't really have to focus on that. You can focus on the top 20%. Again, it's a constant battle. All of us have this all the time. We look at our days and see, what could have we done better? Is it really, really productive? So yeah, I try to be good busy and not really bad busy, but it doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes you just consumed on something else, and yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a common struggle that a lot of people go through, no matter what level they're on. As the book talks a lot about transformational leaders and entrepreneurs, who would you say is the primary audience and reader for this book? Where do you think it would have the most impact?
Oh, great question, Kathy. I would say everybody is the primary audience for the book, because not just companies, even we as individuals want to grow 10x. Because if we don't grow 10x, it's not that motivating. And that's something Dan talks about in his book as well, where hey, the company needs to grow 10x. And if you don't grow 10x, it's hard to retain people, and which is very true. And even for our own personal growth, we need to be growing 10x. So for instance, one thing Dan talks about in the book is, hey, what are the 2 or 3 important things you're going to do a day? Or what are your 2 or 3 biggest wins? And this applies to all of us, not just executives or entrepreneurs or people running businesses. It just applies to you and me. It applies to each and every one of us. So where, hey, what are my 2 biggest wins for today? Just write it down. So you end on a good note. And you talk about this a lot on our conversations. Sometimes I feel like, hey, we could have done better. But then you say, hey, let's not focus on the gap. Again, the gap needs to be filled, but let's also focus on the gain. This is something you have told me. And that's something which is talked about in the book as well, where, hey, let's not just focus too much on the gap, focus on the gain. That will give you motivation, because success does motivate you. Or writing a journal, that is something which also helps, keeping yourself organized. I think there is great stuff for each and every one of us in the book. I wouldn't say it's just for entrepreneurs, though it says entrepreneurs on the book. I think all of us can learn, right? I mean, everybody working, or even if you're not working, if you're working on something else, how can you grow 10x? Just focus on 2 or 3 things. You can't do everything. Another thing he talks about in the book is, hey, before you go to bed, 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour before you go to bed, don't use your cell phone or don't check the internet, so you can have a good sleep. So all of us need that. Yeah.
I would say definitely, yes. Easy to get distracted in this day and age. So yeah, I mean, it certainly sounds like a lot of the lessons that come from this book are certainly applicable in the larger sense. So that's good to know. I'm curious as well how helpful it was for you to hear about some very specific examples of people who have used a similar strategy in their workflow productivity, such as the YouTuber Mr. Beast, who obviously is very, very well known and has great success. And I believe another one was the real estate agent, Linda McKissick. Does this help in making more of a personal impact and providing the reader with that real world applicability?
Oh, definitely. Everybody watches Mr. Beast. And one thing I got to know reading the book is Mr. Beast's name is Jimmy Donaldson. Maybe a lot of people already know that. But yeah, that was news for me because I didn't know. I knew Mr. Beast as Mr. Beast, but he started as Jimmy Donaldson and Mr. Beast. Yeah, one thing he talks about in the book is they focus on quality, not on quantity. I've also been doing some personal YouTube videos, and I can relate to it a little bit because hey, you don't have to do too many videos. You just focus on high quality videos. You focus on high quality content. So that is a learning which applies to all of us. Hey, you don't really have to focus on too many things. Just focus on quality. That is going to get you better results. And with respect to the real estate agent you talked about, Linda, that was a good read as well from the book because essentially she was also stuck, but then the way she navigated is by getting help. So you have to get help. You can't just do everything yourself, where you get an executive assistant to help you out with things. So you don't have to do everything. So yeah, so these are lessons we can learn. And one thing I firmly believe in is it's not just about reading. We say readers are leaders, but you apply what you read into your work. I think that's going to have a big impact.
Yeah, I agree. I think we can't forget to take the lessons and put it into practical use from reading something, especially so impactful. And yeah, it's good to know that, as you said, you really can't depend just on yourself to get everything done. I think that's another thing that even myself is guilty of having that mindset, that I have to do this and I have to get things done, but having the team and having support is equally as important to success. So that's a good lesson to take away.
Yeah, you can, in terms of help, you can always get assistance, not just from your team, but you can also get outside help. You can hire a contractor and ask them to help you out with things. That's another way to navigate it. And I've been experimenting with that as well, or we have been experimenting with that. Yeah.
Yeah, great point. Great point. So yeah, in terms of the book itself, I'm curious if you have a favorite passage or even a quote from the book that you want to share, something that stood out to you as being the most impactful perhaps to you for your career and your goals in business.
Great question, Kathy. There were quite a few. One thing I did really love is the great actor, Leonardo DiCaprio. He says, every next level of your life will require a different you. If you think about it, every next level of your life will require a different you. So you have to reinvent yourself all the time. So 10 years ago, or even, and this is something Dan talks about in the book as well. So you have to revisit that top 20% often. You can't just be doing the top 20% forever. And then after a certain point, you revisit that and you reinvent yourself. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And another quote which did catch my attention a lot was James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits. He wrote that the difference between good and great is often the extra round of revision. If you think about it, you write a blog and then you read it. You could say, hey, you know what? I could be doing a little better. So it's just a little extra round of revision. I thought, this was really, really fascinating for me. And another good learning from the book as well is he talks about categorizing your days. You have free days in a year, focus days, and buffer days. So you stack your meetings one after the other. You don't have to do a meeting on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Let's say meeting Mondays. You do all your meetings on Mondays. So that way you're done with that. And Tuesdays, you can actually prepare. And that's the buffer day where you prepare for your performance. And then he asks you to take free time, vacation. You just go out, don't think about anything else. You just sign off, and then you regenerate yourself and come back. Yeah.
Great insight for sure. I love that quote that you pulled from Leonardo DiCaprio, to be a different you. It really says a lot in a lot of different ways. So that's an amazing one. And what would you say is your biggest takeaway, both personally and professionally, from the advice that you gained from the book? How do you plan on putting it into practice at work and even outside of work?
I would say keep things simple and subtract. So I'm looking at the list of things I'm doing and what can I get rid of? What do I really not need to do? How can I do less? And the key to growing 10x as a company or as a person is not by doing more, it's by doing less. And that's something I'm looking at in terms of, hey, what can I be doing and how can I reduce my work? How can I keep things simple so I can focus on things which I really like and I love doing, that top 20%. So I would say that's my biggest takeaway, and doing less, keeping things simple. Steve Jobs is a great example of keeping his product simple or keeping the whole work style simple. And that's something which is coded in the book as well. So these are some learnings which I'm trying to put into practice. I always want to make sure that I keep a tab at it.
Yeah, and I can attest that you're also helping to try to spread that practice in the company as well, which is, something that's great in addition for you to be able to take these learnings into practice, but then also to share that with the team and help us to also put things like that into practice as well. So that's great.
Yeah. And one thing I do want to add is, you asked, right? So who reads the book and who should read the book? It's for everybody. And one thing interesting we did, which I thought was fascinating, is we asked our team to read the book as well. And just this morning, about 10 of us got together and we started discussing the book. Hey, what are our learnings? How can we make our work a little different? And what can we take from the book? And it's just not about reading. It's about putting it into practice, as you rightly said, having that 10x mentality. So it was a great session. I really enjoyed chatting with the team on this. And there was a lot of learning. And everybody needs to be on the same page. You need to connect the dots and work together.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thanks, Karthik. I think all your insights are really helpful to those who might even be looking at this book and wondering how it can help them, and an influence for them to go and pick it up and give it a read.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. Thanks for doing this. And we're really excited that we have started this new series within Driven by DCKAP. Readers are leaders. We definitely encourage you to read books. It makes you better. It's made my life better. And I've gained a lot, though I would like to read more. I'm not an avid reader. I would like to read more. But then, I do pick up books. And so if you have not checked it out, check out 10x is easier than 2x. Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy. And thanks again, everyone, for joining. And I hope you found this conversation helpful. Readers are leaders.
Thanks, Karthik. Looking forward to the next book.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Driven Podcast. Check out our other episodes for more and subscribe to be the first to access every new episode.